Tom lived at the far end of a quiet neighborhood, where the houses lined neat streets and lawns stayed trimmed under the watchful eyes of the homeowners association. His home was different from the others because it stood close to a natural creek that flowed behind the properties. The creek was beautiful in spring, when flowers grew along its edges and birds sang in the trees, but during heavy rains it turned dangerous. Year after year the creek swelled until it overflowed. Water rushed into yards, carried mud down the street, and sometimes even entered homes. Tom had lost his garden twice to the flooding, and each time he had to spend weeks cleaning the mess. The rest of the neighborhood suffered too, but the board of the association only sent out notices telling people to prepare, never offering real solutions. Tom was not a man who liked waiting for others to solve his problems. He worked as a carpenter and enjoyed fixing things with his own hands. Every time the creek spilled over, he felt frustrated that nothing was being done. He began to think about building something strong that could hold the water back. At first, the idea sounded too big. Building a dam was not a small task, and Tom wondered if it was even possible. Still, the thought stayed in his mind. He started reading books from the library and searching guides about water control and small dams. He learned about stones, wooden beams, and the way water pressure worked. The more he learned, the more the idea grew inside him. He imagined a sturdy wall across the narrowest part of the creek. If he placed it carefully, it would slow the water and create a small pond on his property. It would not only stop flooding, but also bring beauty to his land. He pictured ducks resting on the calm surface and fish swimming below. The image made him smile, but more than that, it gave him hope that the neighborhood could be safe from the yearly floods. One evening, while walking near the creek, Tom noticed how the water curved around a bend and narrowed between two natural stone banks. It was the perfect spot. The ground was solid, and the space between the banks was just wide enough for a strong structure. He crouched down, running his hands across the damp soil, and whispered to himself that this was where it had to be done. In the following weeks, Tom began collecting materials. He bought sturdy planks of wood and heavy stones from a nearby quarry. Neighbors saw him loading his truck but thought he was just preparing for another carpentry project. Tom did not tell anyone his plan, partly because he knew the association would never approve, and partly because he wanted to prove that he could do it alone. Every evening after work, he carried the stones to the creek and placed them carefully. He worked slowly, making sure each layer was stable before adding another. He built supports from wood and hammered them deep into the ground to hold the weight. His hands ached, his back hurt, but he felt proud watching the structure rise. The dam began to take shape. At first it was just a pile of rocks, but soon a small wall stood across the creek. The water pressed against it, testing its strength, but Tom's careful planning held firm. When the first rain came, he held his breath, worried it might break. Instead, the water slowed, spread out behind the wall, and formed a clear pool. On the other side, the creek flowed gently without overflowing. Tom laughed out loud, relief washing over him. It worked. Days turned into weeks, and the dam proved itself again and again. When rain fell, the streets stayed dry. Gardens that once drowned now flourished. Children played outside without their parents worrying about muddy floods. Neighbors noticed the change, but could not understand why it was happening. Some said the weather had been kind, while others believed the city had fixed the drainage. Tom stayed silent, knowing that his hidden wall of stones was the reason. The dam also changed Tom's land. The pool behind it sparkled in the sunlight. Birds gathered near the water and frogs croaked at night. For the first time in years, Tom's garden grew without fear of being destroyed. He planted vegetables, flowers, and even set up a small bench near the water where he could sit and watch the evening sky. He felt proud, not only because he had solved his own problem, but because he had unknowingly helped his entire neighborhood. Yet, in the back of his mind, Tom worried about what might happen if the homeowners association found out. The board members were strict about every detail, from the color of mailboxes to the length of grass. They fined people for the smallest things, like leaving garbage bins out too long or painting fences in shades they did not approve. Tom had already received warnings in the past, once for trimming a tree without asking, and another time for building a shed that was 2 feet taller than allowed. He knew that if they discovered his dam, they would not see it as a solution but as a violation of their rules. Still, Tom told himself that the benefits outweighed the risks. He believed that action spoke louder than regulations, and when the rains returned, the results would be clear. He decided that if the board ever confronted him, he would explain calmly that his dam was not only harmless but necessary. In his heart, he hoped they would understand. As summer passed, Tom continued to strengthen the dam. He added more stones, sealed small gaps with clay, and reinforced the wooden supports. He treated it with the same care he gave to his craft, knowing that strength came from attention to detail. The dam was no longer just a structure. It was a symbol of his effort, his persistence, and his unwillingness to watch problems go unsolved. One afternoon, a neighbor named Linda stopped by while Tom was tending his garden. She admired the healthy rows of vegetables and asked how he managed to keep them safe from the floods. Tom smiled but kept his answer vague, saying only that he had worked hard to protect his land. Linda nodded, unaware that just a few steps behind his property, the quiet pool of water held back by the dam was the real reason. When the first big storm of autumn arrived, Tom's heart raced. He stood near his window, watching as heavy rain hammered the roofs and water poured into the creek. The stream swelled, rushing against the dam with powerful force. Tom clenched his fists, ready to run outside if it showed signs of breaking, but the wall held steady. The water filled the pool, rose to the top, and then flowed gently over the edge, controlled and safe. Outside, the street stayed dry. Neighbors peeked from their windows, expecting to see the usual flood, but nothing came. For the first time in years, the storm passed without disaster. That night, Tom sat by the pool, listening to the sound of water trickling calmly. The moon reflected on the surface, and the air smelled fresh after the rain. He felt both proud and peaceful. The dam had proven itself, and he knew he had made the right choice. But deep down, he also sensed that this peace might not last forever. He knew the homeowners association liked to keep control, and they did not like surprises. For now, though, he allowed himself to enjoy the moment. The neighborhood remained quiet, but rumors began to spread. People started asking why the flooding had suddenly stopped. Some believed it was luck. Others guessed the city had built something underground. Tom listened to their conversations but never revealed the truth. He thought that as long as everyone was safe, the reason did not matter. Tom's project had given him more than safety from floods. It had given him confidence, a sense that he could change his world with his own two hands. He did not know what challenges lay ahead, but he was ready to face them. For now, the creek was calm, his land was safe, and his heart was at peace. For several months, Tom lived peacefully with his dam. The rains came and the streets stayed dry. The neighbors felt grateful, even if they did not know why the floods had stopped. They enjoyed walking outside after storms, seeing their lawns untouched and their basements safe. Children splashed in puddles without fear of muddy water rushing down the street. To most people, it seemed like the neighborhood had finally been blessed with better luck. But good fortune rarely lasted when the homeowners association was involved. The board members always searched for something to control. They were known for driving through the streets, pointing out every little detail that broke their rules. A fence painted the wrong color, a shed built too close to a boundary, grass a little too long. Tom had crossed them before, and he knew they were never far from his property. One bright morning in early winter, Tom was working in his garden when he noticed two board members walking along the creek path behind his house. They carried clipboards, their heads bent low as they spoke in hushed voices. Tom froze for a moment, then straightened his back, pretending to trim plants. He could feel their eyes scanning his yard, searching for anything unusual. He hoped they would walk past without noticing the pool of water shining behind the dam, but luck was not on his side that day. One of the members, a tall man named Brian, pointed toward the creek. His companion, a woman named Martha, leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. They stood there for a long time, whispering before taking notes. Tom felt a heavy weight in his stomach. He had built the dam to protect his home, not to break rules, but he knew the board would never see it that way. That evening, Tom found a letter in his mailbox. The envelope was thick, stamped with the official seal of the Homeowners Association. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside, the words cut deep. According to the board, Tom had constructed an unauthorized structure on community land. They claimed his dam altered the natural flow of water and created a potential hazard. The letter demanded he remove it immediately and included a fine, $50,000. Tom stared at the number, unable to breathe for a moment. $50,000 was more than he earned in a year. He read the letter again and again, hoping he had misunderstood, but the words stayed the same. He had built the dam with his own money and effort, and it had saved everyone from floods. Yet the board treated him like a criminal. Anger surged through him, but behind it came disappointment. He remembered the nights he had spent placing stones, his aching back, his determination to make something good. He had expected challenges, maybe even a warning, but never such a heavy punishment. Tom folded the letter and sat in silence, listening to the gentle trickle of water behind his house. The next day, Tom went to the association office. The building was small but carried an air of authority. Inside, the board members sat around a polished table. Their faces were stern, their voices clipped. Tom tried to stay calm as he explained why he had built the dam. He told them about the floods, the damage, the sleepless nights. He spoke of how the dam had saved not only his garden, but also the streets and homes of the neighborhood. But the board was unmoved. Brian leaned forward, his voice cold. He said rules were rules and no one was allowed to build without permission. Martha added that the creek was part of community land, and Tom had no right to change it. Another member, a man named Henry, reminded Tom that unauthorized construction could cause unseen dangers, like weakening soil or blocking natural wildlife paths. Tom listened, trying to keep his temper under control. When they finished, he asked them if they had noticed how the streets had stayed dry since the dam was built. He asked if they had seen the difference, the safety it provided. For a moment, the room fell quiet. Some members exchanged glances, but no one spoke in his favor. Finally, Brian repeated the fine and ordered Tom to remove the dam within 2 weeks. Tom walked out of the office feeling defeated. The sun outside felt harsh, the world heavier. He knew he had done something good, yet the board only saw a violation. On his way home, neighbors greeted him warmly, talking about how nice it was that the neighborhood had not flooded in months. Tom smiled politely, but inside he burned with frustration. He wanted to tell them the truth, to reveal that he had saved them all, but the fine weighed on his shoulders like chains. That night Tom could not sleep. He sat by his window, watching the moonlight reflect off the pool of water behind the dam. He thought of all the effort he had poured into building it, the long evenings, the tired muscles, the quiet pride. Now the board wanted to erase it all with a single letter. He asked himself if he should fight back, gather the neighbors, and show them the truth. But he also remembered how strict the board was, how much power they carried. In the following days, Tom tried to go about his routine, but the fine haunted him. Every time he saw the letter on his desk, his chest tightened. $50,000 was impossible. Even if he sold his tools and worked extra hours, he could never pay such an amount. It was not just about money, it was about respect. The board had chosen to punish him instead of recognizing the value of his work. Some neighbors began to notice Tom's troubled mood. Linda, the kind woman who had once asked about his garden, stopped by again. She asked if everything was all right. Tom hesitated, then told her part of the truth. He said the board had accused him of breaking rules and fined him unfairly. Linda frowned, shaking her head, saying the association always went too far. She told him she believed he was a good neighbor and wished she could help. Her words brought some comfort, but Tom still felt alone in his battle. As the deadline approached, Tom grew restless. He spent hours walking along the creek, staring at the dam. The stone stood firm, the water calm. There was nothing dangerous about it, nothing harmful. In fact, without it, the creek would return to its old ways, flooding the streets with every heavy rain. He thought about ignoring the board, refusing to pay the fine, but he knew they would not stop. They would send more letters, add more charges, and eventually take legal action. The thought filled him with anger, but also with a strange kind of determination. He realized he had to make a choice. He could keep the dam and fight the board, or he could take it down and let the creek run wild again. Both options carried weight, but neither felt fair. One evening, as dark clouds gathered in the distance, Tom sat on his bench by the water. He listened to the frogs croak and the soft rush of the stream. His heart ached with the unfairness of it all. He had built something strong, something good, yet those in power could not see its value. He wondered what the neighborhood would think if they ever faced another flood. Would they remember the quiet months of safety? Would they understand what had kept them dry? The answer lay hidden in the storm clouds above, waiting to reveal itself. For now, Tom knew only one thing. The Homeowners Association had declared war against his dam, and soon he would have to decide how to respond. The letter from the Homeowners Association did not leave Tom's mind. Each morning when he woke, it sat on his desk, a sharp reminder of the battle waiting for him. Each night before he slept, it haunted him again. $50,000. Remove the dam. 2 weeks. The words repeated in his head like a drumbeat. He tried to focus on his work, fixing cabinets and repairing fences for his clients. But every hammer strike reminded him of the structure he had built by the creek. Tom had always been a man of patience. He believed that problems could be solved with steady hands and clear thoughts. Yet this time, patience felt like weakness. The board had not only ignored the good he had done, but insulted his effort with a crushing fine. He walked through his garden, looked at the pool of calm water behind the dam, and felt torn. He had built it to protect his home and the neighborhood, but now the very people who lived in those homes were silent while the board treated him like a rule breaker. Some days, Tom felt angry enough to keep the dam and fight. He imagined standing in front of the board, declaring that he would not remove it. He imagined neighbors gathering behind him, showing support. But deep down, he knew the truth. The Homeowners Association had power, money, and lawyers. If he resisted, they would drag him into a court battle he could never afford. Other days, Tom thought about quietly tearing the dam down. He would lift the stones one by one and let the creek flow free again. If he did that, the board would be satisfied and the fine might vanish. He would lose his hard work, but at least he would escape their punishment. Yet every time he thought of destroying it, his chest grew heavy. It was not just a wall of stones and wood. It was months of labor, late evenings, sore muscles, and hope. It was the reason the streets had stayed dry. To remove it would feel like surrender. As the deadline drew closer, Tom spent long hours sitting by the water, weighing his options. He studied the ripples, listened to the croak of frogs, and asked himself what mattered most. Was it worth clinging to his creation if it meant drowning in debt? Was it worth fighting rules that no one else dared to challenge? Or was there another path he had not yet seen? One afternoon, while Tom sat on the bench near the dam, Linda stopped by again. She carried a basket of bread she had baked and offered him a piece. Tom accepted with a tired smile. Linda noticed the troubled look in his eyes and asked if he had found a way to resolve the matter with the board. Tom shook his head. He explained, with honesty this time, that the dam was his work. He told her how it had stopped the flooding, how it had saved the neighborhood, and how the board had responded with a fine instead of thanks. Linda listened carefully. When he finished, she placed a hand on his arm and said she believed him. She told him she had suspected he was behind the sudden change, and she admired his courage. She wished the rest of the neighborhood knew the truth, but she also warned that many would stay silent out of fear of the board. Her kindness warmed Tom's heart, yet it also deepened his sadness. He realized that even if some neighbors supported him privately, few would dare to stand beside him openly. That night, Tom made a list. On one side, he wrote the reasons to keep the dam. On the other, he wrote the reasons to take it down. The first side filled quickly: safety, beauty, pride, and proof that one person could make a difference. The second side was shorter but heavier: the fine, the threat of legal action, the endless pressure of the board. He stared at the two columns, knowing the decision could not be made by numbers alone. It was a matter of heart. The next morning, Tom woke before sunrise. The sky glowed faintly pink and the air was cool with the scent of wet grass. He walked down to the creek with a lantern in his hand. Standing before the dam, he studied its strength. The stones were firm, the wood support solid. It looked like it could last for decades. For a long time, he stood in silence, then spoke aloud to the water. "You have kept us safe," he said, "but they do not want you here." His voice cracked, but the decision inside him grew clear. He could not fight the board with money or lawyers. He could not rally a neighborhood too afraid to speak. The only choice left was to do as they demanded. His heart ached, yet his mind found calm in knowing he had reached an answer. He would take the dam down. Tom did not rush. He spent the next 2 days preparing. He gathered tools, set aside gloves, and built a plan to dismantle the structure carefully. If he had built it with care, he would take it apart with care as well. Each evening as he worked, he felt a mix of grief and resolve. Neighbors passing by waved without knowing what he was doing. Linda stopped once more, and when Tom explained his choice, she sighed but understood. She promised to bring him food while he worked, a small act of kindness in the face of loss. When the day came, Tom began at sunrise. He removed the wooden beams first, hammering them loose from the ground. His muscles strained, his hands blistered, but he worked steadily. The sound of cracking wood echoed across the creek. Next, he lifted the stones one at a time and placed them on the bank. The pile grew taller as the dam grew smaller. Water began to slip through the gaps, flowing faster with each stone removed. By midday, Tom paused, wiping sweat from his brow. He stared at what remained of the dam, his heart heavy. The pool of calm water behind it had begun to shrink, draining into the freed creek. Birds flew overhead, unsettled by the change. Tom drank water, then forced himself to continue. He reminded himself that every piece he removed was another step toward ending the board's punishment. As evening approached, the dam was nearly gone. The creek rushed with new force, carrying leaves and sticks downstream. Tom stood at the edge, watching as the last traces of his work washed away. He felt as if a piece of himself had been torn out, yet he also felt strangely lighter. The burden of the fine, the weight of constant worry, had begun to lift. That night he sat on his porch, sore and exhausted. The creek no longer shone like a pool, but he could hear its natural song again. The sound was wilder, harsher, yet it was free. Tom closed his eyes and whispered that he had done what he must. He had protected his home once, and if needed, he would find another way again. But deep inside, another thought stirred. He wondered how long it would take for the neighborhood to notice. Without the dam, the creek would return to its old ways. The next storm would bring the truth crashing down, and only then would people understand the value of what he had done. For now, he had made his choice. He had given in to the board, but the future belonged to the water. And Tom, sitting in silence under the dark sky, felt that the story of his dam was not truly over. After Tom removed the dam, the creek returned to its wild nature. The water rushed more quickly, carrying twigs, leaves, and mud downstream. At first, the neighborhood did not notice the change. The weather stayed calm for several days, and the sun shone warmly on the quiet streets. Families walked their dogs, children rode their bicycles, and life seemed peaceful. But Tom felt an emptiness every time he looked at the creek. The calm pool behind his house was gone, replaced by restless water that splashed against the banks. The birds that had once gathered there flew elsewhere. The frogs were silent, their little island of safety swept away. Tom's garden still stood strong, but he worried about what the next heavy rain would bring. He had seen the power of the creek before. Without the dam, he knew the danger would return. As days passed, dark clouds began to appear on the horizon. The air grew heavy and the wind carried the smell of rain. Tom felt uneasy, as if the sky itself was warning him. He watched the news and saw reports of a storm forming in the region. It was expected to be stronger than the usual autumn rains. People in town prepared by clearing drains and buying supplies. The Homeowners Association sent out another notice, reminding residents to keep their gutters clean and their yards clear. Tom shook his head when he read it. The board had never been able to stop the floods with letters. On the evening before the storm arrived, Tom walked down to the creek one last time. He stood where the dam had once held back the water. The ground was soft and damp, already weakened by days of small showers. He crouched down, touching the earth, and whispered that the neighborhood had no idea what was coming. His heart ached not out of anger but out of sorrow. He had tried to protect them, but now the board's decision would bring back the very disaster they had forgotten. The storm struck in the middle of the night. Rain poured from the sky in heavy sheets, drumming against rooftops and rattling windows. Wind howled through the trees, bending branches until they cracked. The creek swelled quickly, its waters dark and fierce. By dawn, the narrow stream had grown into a rushing river, spilling over its banks. Tom stood at his window, watching with both fear and grim certainty. The water pushed through the neighborhood with unstoppable force. Lawns disappeared under brown waves and gardens sank into mud. The lower streets filled fast, water rising around cars and mailboxes. Tom saw neighbors rushing outside in their raincoats, shouting and pointing as they tried to save what they could. Some dragged sandbags to their doors, but it was too late. The storm was too strong, and without the dam to hold it back, the flood had free rein. By midday, the neighborhood was in chaos. Children cried as families tried to carry them to safety. Dogs barked, confused by the rising water. The board members, who once spoke with authority in their meetings, now stumbled through knee-deep floods, their clipboards useless in the storm. Brian, the tall man who had demanded the dam's removal, stood on his porch shouting orders that no one could follow. Martha, who had spoken of rules and community land, waded through the street, her clothes soaked as she tried to direct traffic away from the deepest areas. From his hilltop home, Tom remained safe. His land was higher than the rest, and though the creek raged below, his house stood dry. He felt both relief and sorrow. He watched his neighbors struggle, their homes filling with water, and his heart ached for them. Yet he also knew this was the very disaster he had tried to prevent. As the storm raged, Linda appeared at Tom's door, soaked from the rain. She carried her little daughter in her arms, her face pale with worry. She explained that the water had already reached her street, and her house was no longer safe. Tom welcomed her inside, giving her towels and blankets. Soon after, a few more neighbors arrived, seeking shelter on higher ground. Tom opened his doors to them as well, offering what space he had. His living room filled with frightened families, their eyes wide as they listened to the roaring flood outside. By evening, the storm finally began to weaken, but the damage had already been done. The streets were rivers, and many homes stood under several feet of water. Furniture floated in living rooms, cars were half submerged, and fences leaned at broken angles. The once perfect neighborhood looked like a disaster zone. The board members tried to assure everyone that help would come soon, but their voices no longer carried the same authority. People were angry, frustrated, and scared. That night, as the rain slowed to a drizzle, Tom sat with Linda and the other neighbors in his home. They shared food, blankets, and quiet conversation. For the first time, some of them began to piece together the truth. They remembered how the floods had stopped during the months when Tom's dam stood. They remembered how suddenly the board had demanded something to be removed, though no one had understood what it was. Now, looking at the water outside, they began to realize what Tom had done for them. The next morning, the storm had passed, but the neighborhood lay in ruin. Mud covered the streets and broken branches floated in pools of standing water. Families walked outside in silence, surveying the damage. Some cried softly while others shouted in anger. The homeowners association called an emergency meeting at the community hall, though it was difficult for people to even reach the building through the mess. Tom did not go to the meeting. He stayed at his house, helping the neighbors who had sheltered with him. He gave them tools to clear mud, helped move furniture, and offered kind words. He felt no pride in being right, only sadness that it had come to this. Still, he knew the storm had proven his point more clearly than any argument ever could. At the meeting, the board members tried to calm the crowd. They spoke of insurance, of cleanup, of responsibility, but the residents were no longer willing to listen quietly. People demanded answers. They asked why nothing had been done to stop the floods. They asked why the board had punished the one man who had actually taken action. Brian and Martha exchanged nervous glances, but they had no good reply. The voices of the people grew louder, frustration spilling over like the water that had filled their homes. When Linda returned from the meeting, she told Tom what had happened. The board had struggled to keep control, but the residents were furious. Many had openly accused them of destroying the solution that had kept the neighborhood safe. For the first time, the authority of the association was crumbling. Tom listened quietly. He did not celebrate their downfall. Instead, he felt a heavy sense of justice. Like the storm had spoken the truth for him, he had not needed to argue or fight. The water had shown everyone what the board had refused to see. In the days that followed, cleanup crews arrived. Trucks pumped water from the streets and workers cleared debris. Families worked together, carrying ruined furniture to the curb and helping each other rebuild. Tom continued to assist his neighbors, offering his tools and skills as a carpenter. He repaired doors, built shelves to replace those destroyed, and gave his time freely. Slowly, people began to look at him with gratitude instead of curiosity. One evening, as the sun set over the muddy neighborhood, Linda stood beside Tom by the creek. The water had calmed, flowing quietly once again. She thanked him for his kindness, not only during the storm but also for the months of safety his dam had given them. She said she wished the board had listened to him. Tom nodded but said nothing. He knew words could not change what had happened. The neighborhood was forever changed. The storm had taken away more than furniture and gardens. It had taken away the illusion that the board always knew best. People now understood that one man with determination had done more to protect them than a dozen rules and fines ever could. And though Tom still felt the ache of losing his dam, he also felt a quiet strength. He had built something once, and he knew he could build again. The storm had taken his work, but it had also given him something back, the respect of his neighbors and the knowledge that truth always rises, just like water. The storm had passed, but the neighborhood carried scars that could not be hidden. Water lines stained the walls of homes, cars stood rusted and ruined, and gardens once full of color now looked like patches of brown mud. The smell of damp earth and broken wood lingered in the air. Yet, in the middle of the damage, people began to move with a new sense of unity. Tom watched them from his porch. He saw neighbors helping each other carry heavy furniture to the curb. Children worked with their parents to gather scattered toys from the mud. For the first time, the neighborhood looked less like a collection of separate houses and more like a community. The storm had taken much away, but it had also opened their eyes. The Homeowners Association Board, however, had not recovered so easily. The storm had not only drowned the streets, but also their authority. Residents no longer spoke of the board with respect. Instead, they whispered about how wrong the leaders had been. The emergency meeting after the storm had turned into a moment of truth. People had demanded answers, and the board members had stumbled through excuses. That day, trust had broken, and it would not return. Tom had stayed quiet through it all. He did not attend the meetings, nor did he raise his voice against the board. He simply worked with his hands and offered his time to those who asked for help. Slowly, people began to approach him. They asked for advice, for guidance, and sometimes just for a kind word. Linda was often by his side, encouraging others to see what Tom had done for them. One afternoon, as Tom hammered new boards onto a neighbor's porch, Brian walked up the street. His clothes were still muddy, and his face carried the weight of sleepless nights. He stopped near Tom, cleared his throat, and spoke in a voice that sounded less proud than before. "You were right," Brian said. "I see it now. I fought against you, and I was wrong. I thought I was protecting the rules, but I wasn't protecting the people. And because of that, we all suffered." Tom looked at him for a long moment. The memory of the $50,000 fine still stung, but he also saw the truth in Brian's eyes. The man was humbled. He was not the same loud voice from the meetings. He was a neighbor who had learned a hard lesson. Tom set down his hammer and nodded. "It is not about being right," he said softly. "It was about keeping everyone safe. I never built that dam to go against the board. I built it because the water needed to be held back. I saw danger and I tried to stop it. That is all." Brian lowered his head. "The board is finished. People do not trust us anymore. They are talking about removing us completely. Maybe that is what should happen." Tom gave no reply. He simply returned to his work, hammering nails into the wood. Yet inside he felt a quiet sense of closure. The storm had spoken for him, louder than any argument ever could. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood slowly rebuilt. Insurance companies arrived, repair crews filled the streets, and families worked side by side to restore what they could. The lawns would take months to grow again, and the broken fences would take time to fix, but hope began to return. One Saturday morning, the residents gathered in the community hall. This time the meeting was not led by the board. Instead, it was called by the people themselves. Every chair was filled and the air buzzed with determination. Linda stood and spoke first. She explained how the storm had revealed the truth about their neighborhood. Rules and fines had not saved them. What had saved lives was the kindness of neighbors like Tom. Others stood to speak as well. One man described how Tom had given him shelter during the storm. A woman explained how he had built shelves in her home to replace the ones destroyed by the flood. Every voice added to the same picture. Tom was the man who had acted when no one else had. Finally, someone proposed that the board be dissolved. The room erupted with agreement. People clapped, cheered, and raised their hands in support. Brian and Martha sat in silence, unable to argue. They had already lost the trust of everyone. That day, the Homeowners Association officially ended. The neighborhood would no longer be ruled by rules written on paper. Instead, it would be guided by the strength of its people. After the meeting, many residents gathered around Tom. They asked him to lead, to become the voice of the community. Tom listened carefully, but he shook his head. "I am not a leader," he said. "I am a builder. I use my hands to fix what is broken. That is all I want to do." But the people did not stop asking. They explained that they needed someone who cared about the neighborhood, someone who had proven his heart was in the right place. Linda placed her hand gently on Tom's arm and said, Sometimes a builder is the best leader, because a leader should build, not destroy. Tom thought about it long into the night. He sat by the creek watching the water move quietly once more. He remembered the days when he had worked alone to build the dam. He remembered the long hours of carrying stones, digging earth, and shaping the flow of the creek. Back then he had done it because he felt it was his duty. Now he saw that his duty might be larger than he had ever imagined. The next morning, Tom stood before his neighbors and spoke with a steady voice. "I will not be your leader," he said. A murmur of disappointment filled the crowd, but Tom raised his hand. "I will be your neighbor, but I will stand with you, guide when needed, and build when it is time. If we work together, we do not need one leader. We need each other." The people listened, and slowly they began to smile. It was not the answer they expected, but it was better. Tom was not placing himself above them. He was standing beside them. That day, the neighborhood made a promise to one another. They would no longer let rules divide them. They would care for one another, protect one another, and listen when someone saw danger. Seasons changed, and the scars of the flood began to heal. New flowers grew in the gardens, fences stood strong again, and laughter returned to the streets. The children rode their bicycles once more, their voices bright under the sun. Families gathered on weekends to share meals, no longer separated by quiet fences but joined together on lawns and porches. As for the creek, it remained wild, but the neighbors no longer ignored it. They worked together to place stones along its banks to clear debris and to watch it carefully when the rains came. It was no longer Tom's burden alone. It was everyone's responsibility, and because of that, the creek became less a threat and more a part of their lives. Tom continued to live simply, tending his garden and repairing what needed fixing. Yet people often came to him, not just for help with wood or nails, but for advice and comfort. He became a quiet pillar of the neighborhood, not a ruler but a guide. Linda often visited, and her daughter would run through Tom's yard, chasing butterflies and laughing in the tall grass. Together they shared many evenings by the creek, speaking of the past and dreaming of the future. There was a warmth between them, a friendship that slowly grew into something more. Though Tom never spoke of it loudly, the light in his eyes whenever Linda smiled said enough. Years later, when people looked back on the great storm, they did not remember the rules of the homeowners association. They did not speak of fines or meetings. They remembered the night when the water came and the day when neighbors stood together. And in every story, Tom's name was spoken with respect. The man who once built a dam became the man who built a community. He had faced unfair punishment. He had watched his work destroyed, and he had seen his neighbors suffer. But in the end, he had given them something greater than safety. He had given them unity, strength, and hope. And though Tom often said he was only a builder, everyone who knew him understood the truth. He was more than that. He was the heart of the neighborhood.